Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 2022 science fiction epic Avatar: The Way of Water. Now, this film is one of those movies that I went into it with really low expectations. I did like Avatar when I gave it a recent rewatch, but I was very leery of this film because it's a sequel that was delayed and was gestating for a decade or more. And for every Top Gun Maverick, there's a lot of these sequels that wait this long that are absolutely awful. So I did not have a lot of faith in this film. I had faith in the film visually. I had faith that the film was going to have visuals that were mesmerizing and magnificent and incredible to look at, but I didn't have as much faith when it comes to the strength of the script, the characters, or its story, because those elements weren't even the strongest aspects of Avatar to begin with. And this is a sequel that is being released so many years after the fact. But I saw the film, and at the end of the day, I thought it was good enough that it would crack my top 10 of 2022. And I never thought I'd be sitting here saying that, but here I am. And in large part, it's due to the visuals, and the film's just absolutely stupendous eye candy. But I also feel that the script and its characters are a step up from its predecessor. And even though the film is admittedly too long and suffers from pacing issues, and there are some other problems in the script that prevent it from being truly great, I still think it's a solid sequel and a solid overall film. Now, the film is directed by James Cameron, who directed Avatar, and just like the previous film, the direction in this is dynamic. It's top notch. It's terrific. James Cameron is still a master filmmaker. He's still a master of his craft. He knows how to shoot sequences in ways that just really create eye popping, just jaw dropping visuals. He really does. He does a great job showcasing the strength of the visual effects and really allowing them to shine. His passion as a visual effects guy and his prior experience working in visual effects definitely does pay off when it comes to the way that his films look visually. And I've always felt he's a good filmmaker when it comes to his selection of shots, the angles, the movement, just everything that comes with filmmaking and direction. Like James Cameron is one of the most consistently sound filmmakers of his generation. And Avatar: The Way of Water is no exception to that. And for a guy who made a remark about not being fueled by testosterone or something along those lines in an interview, this film has a lot of testosterone fueled action sequences in it. In fact, there are more action sequences in The Way of Water than there were in Avatar. This is arguably the most action packed film that James Cameron has directed since True Lies. And I know for some people they might think that's a lie, but I'm telling the truth. Like, it's not as action packed as True Lies, and the action in this isn't on the same level as the action in that movie. But when it comes to Avatar or Titanic, yeah, there are a fair amount of action sequences in this film, whether it's uh, bits of hand to hand combat, whether it's the usual battles between one tribe versus the military, or in this case, the Navi clones of the military. Um, there are a lot of different moments in this film that have some really adrenaline inducing, testosterone fueled action in it. So, for a guy who made a statement like that fairly recently, it's kind of surprising because The Way of Water has a lot of that in it. And those sequences are shot really well. So it shows that James Cameron still hasn't missed a beat when it comes to shooting action. And he's always been a master of the visual spectacle. And I will keep repeating that when it comes to this film, because this is easily the most visually impressive film that I've seen from 2022. Seeing this in IMAX and 3D was a unbelievably mesmerizing experience. Uh, Despite the fact that the film was way too long, the time went by pretty quickly because of just how immersive and just how great this film looked visually. It was one of those things where I couldn't wait to see what the next scene was going to be. I was so enthralled in this world. In particular, once Sully and his family uh, made it to the ocean tribe, when they started learning the ocean tribe's ways and so on. That was just one scene after the next, and during those sequences were just really quite something special when it comes to a cinematic experience. And I think that's really what Cameron focuses on when it comes to these Avatar films. I think really the focus is style over substance, to be perfectly honest. I don't think that he's intending these films to be that substantive, if I could say the word correctly, when it comes to the story or even necessarily the characters. And I can understand why that rubs some people the wrong way. I can understand why some people can't stand that. And I can understand why some people don't like this film or Avatar for that reason. But there are some filmmakers, there are some films out there that are exceptions to that rule for me when it comes to style over substance. Most of the time I don't care for it. But when it comes to something like this, I I I it I don't mind it. It doesn't really bother me as much as it does with other films because the style is just so spectacular and it's so well done. Now, my feelings on the film could change with more viewings. That's what happened with Avatar, because when I first saw Avatar in the theater, I was amazed by it and I really liked it. So there's a chance that my opinion of this film might shift with another view, but as of right now, I can only go off of my first time impression of the film, and it's a really positive impression for the most part, despite admittedly some things that kind of annoyed me and its pacing issues. But the direction is not a problem. The direction is not at all anything that is problematic when it comes to this film. Once again, James Cameron just knocks it out of the park, hits a home run, and unlike other filmmakers that have had such a long layoff in between films, it doesn't look like he skipped a beat. And that just showcases how talented of a filmmaker he is. Because there's a lot of filmmakers, a lot of great directors, like Walter Hill, for instance, who had a long layoff and then came back, and then his films look like they were shot direct to video. And that's not really the case here with Avatar. It doesn't look like James Cameron has lost anything when it comes to his touch as a filmmaker. Now, when it comes to the overall quality of his films, that's debatable. I mean, I think the last great film he directed was True Lies, but I don't think he's necessarily directed a completely, totally bad film since then either. Now, James Cameron also had a part in the script, but he had some other writers this time around, and Rick Jaffa and Amanda Silver. And I think that really did help this film. I mentioned in my review of Avatar that Cameron could benefit from another writer or two. And this film is a prime example of that. This is a movie that really does feel like there are different writers and different people who are adding their vision and their take to what Cameron has in mind for this saga. And I think that's a net positive. I think that's why a good amount of these characters come across stronger than they did in the first film. I think that's why some of the new characters shine as much as they do. And I think that's also why there are some very glaring issues, but I think these are things that can be ironed out. And I remember reading something that Cameron is going to be less involved with the script for the next sequel or the sequel after that. And he's just going to focus mainly on directing. And I think that's a good approach to take for the franchise going forward. Now, before I talk about the the positives of this script, I do want to get some negatives off my chest. This is a screenplay that does suffer from being a little too repetitive in terms of recycling some things that were present in the previous film. Like, there's a lot of stuff here that just feels kind of samey, especially early on in the movie. Like, the first hour or so of this film, I was very on the fence with this movie because I wasn't as engaged with it as much as I wound up being when once it changed the setting. So when it was still on, the same setting and the same essential wavelength as the first movie, with Sully and his new family in the forest and so on, and the military once again being the antagonist, but this time around they're Na'vi, or at least a fair amount of them are Na'vi. They were clones that were bred from the soldiers that died in Avatar. So I was like, okay, so we have the same villains again, basically, but without the Giovanni Ribisi guy. So you still have Quadrach, Quadrach, who was the villain, the main villain in Avatar, but this time around he's Navi, and you have his group of military personnel, and you have a new head of the military here that's giving orders. This female character played by Edie Falco, General Francis Ardmore, but there really wasn't anything to that character. That character was so poorly thought out, so weak in terms of motivation or characterization. I'm really hoping that they saved her backstory and depth for a sequel or something, because there's nothing to this character at all. And so yeah, so they introduce this new female general, but give you nothing with this character other than she's just a new general of the military faction that's trying to still take over Pandora, and she happens to be female. That's really about it. So yeah, there's a lot of similar stuff. The Sky People come back and they burn the forest down, and and there's a conflict, and there looks like there's a showdown in the jungle again. But this time around, it's between Sully, his actually his kids. They see Quatrich and his Navi military snooping around, and then it turns into a bit of a conflict and a bit of a mini battle in the jungle. And it leads to Sully and his family leaving Home Tree and then going to the ocean and learning the ocean people's ways. And similar to what happened when Sully was human, or he was human but using the avatar, the Navi avatar, to learn the ways of the Navi. So learn how to live in the forest and do all that. Very similar to that stuff. The stuff with Quatrich and the military Navi, very similar to what you saw in the first film in terms of learning how to fly on the dragon creatures and all this other stuff. So there are a lot of moments in this where it feels like they just recycled plot points from the previous film, which is lazy. It's lazy writing. And this is what I mean when it comes to style over substance, because I think that was kind of an intentional decision to make. I do find it interesting they recycled a lot of stuff, but they forgot some things. Like, for instance, in Avatar, it was established that when you go through the mountain ranges, the floating mountain ranges, you have issues with your radar, and tracking equipment doesn't work properly, and so on. Well, they fly through these mountains and they don't have any issues. Maybe I missed something, but it just seemed. That's what it seemed like. They went through the mountain range and they had no problems whatsoever. And I'm like, why did that happen? And there are times where the writing, it's like I said, it has issues that are tied into the sameness of things and the familiarity of things, but also issues that are tied into something else entirely, which is a lack of continuity, which that's even more glaring and even more frustrating to see when the screenwriters don't even realize that they're not following their own rules. For instance, there is a scene that establishes that anytime the military tries to go and do some sort of attack on the Navi, they get attacked tenfold. They don't stand a chance. Their flying ships get shot down. They get swarmed in seconds. And once they have the military Navi who show up and fly around in a carrier and land near Home Tree, then they're able to fly around their ships and do reconnaissance and so on without any issues whatsoever. That is ridiculous. That is a really bad oversight by the writers. And there are some other instances like that, like near the end. Where did the Water Tribe go? They were involved in this big battle with the military, and then they just left. They disappeared, and you were just left with Sully and his family, plus some members of the Water Tribe's family, to fend for themselves. And I get why it's set up that way, to create some tension and suspense for the climax, but why did they leave? Yeah, maybe it might have been another thing that I missed, possibly, which is definitely a possibility because this film is so long. But if it's not, that's not good. That's something they definitely should tighten up for Avatar 3. But yeah, there's some continuity issues. There's some moments where things just feel a little bit too same when it comes to the plot. And there are also some things involving some of the characters and some of the bits of drama that feel a little bit too forced. For instance, with the character that I like to call teenage Sigourney, uh, Kiri, she has this sequence when she hooks up her hair to an underwater uh, tree, and she has a seizure underwater, and she gets resuscitated later, and one of the medical guys essentially says she can't do that again because it could kill her. She does it like numerous times later on in the film, and doesn't have a seizure, doesn't have anything remotely connected to a seizure, so it's just a pointless forced bit of drama that didn't need to be there. Really, that was not necessary. So there are things like that in the script as well, where you're like, we didn't really need that. The whole stuff with the whale and the whalers in term, I'm fine with the whalers being there because it establishes a an origin, so to speak, for the whale that befriends Payakan, that befriends one of the main characters, and so it gives it that the whale an origin. But you don't need to have the sequence where you show the whalers getting the brain fluid out of the whale and talking about how they sell it to the highest bidder or whatever. The film kind of stopped at that point just to do this whole bit, and the film has enough pacing issues, so it didn't need that sequence. So yeah, there's definitely some fat that could have been trimmed when it comes to this script. I think the first hour of the film could have been cut down a little bit in terms of tightening things up and making things a little more streamlined, so you're not stuck with what feels like the same story for a little bit too long of the running time until uh um the Sully family decides to leave Home Tree. But despite my issues with the script, I still think it's a good screenplay. And the reason for that is once you get past a lot of the, oh, it's a sequel, oh, it's this where we gotta call back to the previous film, and we gotta have this sort of refresher course, so to speak, for Avatar. Once you get past that and you start getting to the Metacana, I think I probably mispronounced it. That's when the story gets more interesting, despite the fact that you could argue that it's still kind of the same sort of thing about learning new ways, but they don't linger on those moments during that part of the plot. They show a few scenes where the characters are unable to quickly master the new flying creatures, I don't know, like swordfish or marlin or something. They're not able to master it right away, and they're struggling to breathe underwater initially, but they move past it fairly quickly. So then you can get to some new stuff, like the stuff with Payakan. And that stuff in particular, I really liked. I really liked the connection and the bond that, that, sorry, I'm just looking up, yeah, that Loak has with Payakan. I really liked that. I thought that was sweet. I thought it was a really nice touch for the film. It definitely tied into the whole theme, which is about, in a lot of ways, appreciating the way of the water, appreciating the sea life, and appreciating the ocean, and so on. And speaking of that appreciation, I think the writers did a much better job with the messaging in this script than the messaging in Avatar. It's not nearly as thick, it's not nearly as in your face. There's not scenes where you have characters say things like it's just a bunch of trees. Like you don't have that. There's definitely a little bit there with the whalers and everything, but it isn't as forced. It feels more in line, and it fits more with the story because of the backstory that they provide for Pyakon. And like I said, I could easily be butchering that name, and I apologize. I'm no Avatar expert when it comes to the linguistics. But yeah, it feels like there's more to it than just your typical cliched evil industrialist, rich Americans trying to burn the rainforest down and make a profit and mine it for everything it's got. Like that's not the case here. Like you get a little bit of that with the whales, but I think because of the fact that these whales are set up as not only living, breathing things, but creatures that have memories and emotions and so on. It just makes things all the more effective when it comes to the emotional weight of the message that the film is trying to convey. There's only so much you can do with trees. I mean, I care about trees. I care about the environment, and I think it's messed up when it comes to what's going on with deforestation and so on, especially in the rainforest. But it's really hard to connect with trees on the same level as you can with a whale, for instance. So I feel that is an improvement, a dramatic improvement when it comes to uh, the script. Another dramatic improvement, I think, is honestly how these characters are written. I think providing Jake and Natiri with a family, I think that really does help in terms of making them more engaging and making them characters that you sympathize and feel for more because the stakes are higher. Um, Also, I like the family. I like the kids. I think that's another really nice addition to this story and to this film because it really adds a different dynamic where you have Took and you have uh yeah, Loak and Netiam, and you have teenage Sigourney, Curie, which I really liked. Curie is arguably my favorite character in the film. And she really did provide a very intriguing perspective on things. This idea that she is essentially the daughter of Sigourney Weaver's character in Avatar. And this whole thing of she's technically the daughter, but then she's also kind of in some ways her. Like she's kind of in some ways a reincarnation or a rebirth of Dr. Grace Augustine because she's the daughter of the Avatar. And so there's a lot of the same DNA there. And because Sigourney also voiced this character, and her, facial features were used for it. It just set it a fun dynamic of just seeing teenage Sigourney sulking and doing typical teenager stuff. And I think her connection with the environment and the whole stuff with her feeling like an outsider because of that, I connected with that. And all in all, I just really liked that character. I think they did a good job writing uh, Kiri. And I think they did a good job writing Loak as well. I really feel that once you get to the point where he's not just being the younger brother who's trying too hard to impress his father or his older brother and disobeying orders and so on, once you get to the stuff with him and Pyakon, I think that's where the character really starts to become engaging and really interesting. And I didn't even mind the other Navi, the water Navi. I didn't mind those characters either. Tonawari and Ronal and uh, the daughter, um, Rhea, and even some of the other characters. Um, the villains, though, here's the thing. I think on one hand, there's a little bit of an improvement in terms of how the villains are written, because when it comes to Quatrich in particular, they do a better job writing him in a way where he's not so over the top. There's not so much hoorah, just annoying cartoon villain stuff with the writing for this character. It's more balanced, and I think that definitely does help, but I'm still not really a big fan of Quatrich. So him being a Navi doesn't really move the needle that much. I mean, I can tolerate his character in this more, the Navi Quatrich, but that's only because they tone things down, and it's not because I particularly find the character that interesting. So that's kind of disappointing that his character is back and he's going to be a big part of the saga, and I wish this was just it for Quatrich. It's not a strong enough character to have him carry over throughout the rest of the franchise. I'm sorry. He's not this franchise's Darth Vader. I think it doesn't even come close. He's not even Darth Maul. Um but yeah, just the like I said, the whole stuff with Edie Falco's character, uh, Francis Ardmore, nothing to that character. The whaling guy, that was I would say the whaling guy is like the one villain that I like had any sort of like really emotional reaction to, in terms of I hated this guy. The whaling, the whaler. Um, yeah, I think Captain Mick Scoresby, played by Brendan Cowell. Like he's the only one that I like absolutely despise and wanted to see get absolutely wrecked by Paya Khan. And that's because of the fact that I fucking hate whalers. So, that it's not even necessarily maybe due to this character, but regardless, I still think the script did a better job making me hate the guts of this guy than any other villain in this entire script. Even with Quatrich and his determination to try to get revenge on Sully. But for the most part, despite my issues with the way the villains are written, it's still a decent enough script when it comes to these characters. It does a better job with the main cast, at least the Na'vi, and making them more engaging and making them more interesting than what was present in the previous film. Now, I also liked the fact that you had a climax that was more claustrophobic, more of a us against a small army sort of thing. I liked that. I liked that about the film. I liked it how it became this race against time to try to survive being drowned, and I like that aspect of it as well. I like that the climax of the film isn't just another big battle. That you had that, but then a good chunk of it's just hand to hand combat. It's Sully and Natiri against Quatrich and his men. I like that a lot, actually. And I like that there were a lot of stakes in during that conflict. I like that there was loss that I wasn't necessarily expecting. I think the loss that you have with one of the main characters with Sorry, I'm trying to find the name of this character. He's got a weird name. That's why. Kind of hard to remember. Like all these other Navi characters are pretty. Netiam. So yeah, Netiam, he dies. He dies at the end of this film. So the older brother, who's supposed to be the one that's going to carry on Sully's legacy, he dies. He dies in battle. So I didn't necessarily see that coming. Speaking of brothers, you have the whole sort of one brother for another with Spider, which I didn't mention. I should have mentioned Spider when I was talking about characters. I think I forgot about Spider because I'm not really a big fan of Spider either. Spider is this son of Quatrich that comes out of nowhere, and he's like Tarzan boy. I half expected every scene that he was in to have the song Tarzan Boy in the background. Oh, 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 but yeah, I wasn't really a big fan of that character. It didn't really do much for me. So that's why I forgot about mentioning that character. But yeah, there were some issues. Like, why did you leave? Why did you have Quatrich live? Just have him die. Why do you have to have this whole nonsense where Spider saves him and have to have this drama of he saved him and that's so he can uh carry on, and there'll be all these different transitions with this character. It's like, I don't care. I don't care whether Quatrich turns a new leaf or whether he remains a bad guy. I don't give a shit. This villain has reached his course. He's reached it. He's reached his end. I mean, you barely made it work here with Navi Quatrich for one sequel. So, yeah, I'm not big on that for the ending, but all the other stuff I'm fine with. And I like that Sully and his family, they remain a part of the Water Tribe. And I like the way that it ends with the last shot because it ties in directly to how the first film ended. So I thought that was a nice touch too. That added a good bit of continuity. But yeah, good script, not great, but still a relatively solid script, even though it does have some issues. Now, Avatar: The Way of Water had some relatively good performances by the cast as well. It's kind of hard to judge a lot of these performances because a good chunk of them are motion capture stuff, so a lot of it is mostly voiceover work. Now, a lot of them did do a lot of underwater swimming and a lot of their own stunts and so on, but a lot of the performance is tied into what the animators created when it comes to the visuals. So a lot of it is very heavily reliant upon voiceover. And it's about on the same level as a lot of the same stuff that was in the first. Sam Worthington is as Sully and Zoe Saldaña as Natiri. Um, I think their performances in this are every bit as good as they were in the first film. I think they're still relatively solid, and because of the fact that Sully doesn't have to really showcase his boring human personality as much. Uh, I think that definitely helps this character in this movie be more consistently interesting because of the fact that he is fully Nabi and he's dealing with all these different conflicts and he's dealing with this whole stuff with him being a father and trying to protect his family and making decisions that he might not necessarily have made in the past in order to do so, which is the tactical decision to take his family and take them away from Home Tree. And Zoe Saldana, her character also goes through a lot of different sort of changes, dealing with loss of not only her home and uh, a lot of other things that are tied into her upbringing, but also a loss of her son. So there's a lot of that strife that's going on, and I think Zoe does a remarkable job yet again as Natiri. I think it's some of her best work as an actress. Sigourney Weaver, she's a lot of fun as Kiri. I really liked her performance as Kiri. Had a lot of spunk, a lot of charisma, there was a sense of genuine wonder that she brought to the role when it comes to how Kiri is experiencing the underwater landscape and the beauty of it all. Stephen Lang as Quattridge, I liked his performance better here as a recombinant Navi Quattridge than his performance in Avatar because it is more measured. It isn't as over the top, but it's still not really anything that amazing. At best, it's just kind of there. Um, Kate Winslet is a newcomer. She voices Renal, the wife of Tonawari. She's fine. I honestly didn't even recognize it was Kate Winslet, but she's fine for what the character is and what she had needed to bring to it. She brought her own balance of vulnerability and intensity to the role that was unique enough in her approach that it didn't just feel like it was just another uh, Natiri, for instance. It didn't feel like she was just following closely in the footsteps of Zoe Saldana. Cliff Curtis was also good as Tonawari. I especially like the back and forth between him and Sully. Um, You also have Edie Falco as Frances Ardmore. Nothing to this performance. I can't really judge it at all because she's barely even in the movie. Brendan Cowell as Mick Scoresby. It's not the most deep role, but man, does the guy sell it? I hated this guy. I even flipped this character off when I uh, saw a certain scene in the film involving the whaling and stuff like that. Because, like I said, I hate whalers. Fuck whalers. Um, Jermaine Clement, who played the marine biologist, there's really not really much to say about him, as well as Joel David Moore as Norm, who reprises his role from the first movie. Um, Britan Dalton, Trinity Jo-Li Bliss, and Bailey Bass. Uh, they play Loak Took. No, Bailey Bass plays Rhea. Um, Took is played by Trinity. Britain Dalton plays Loak. Jamie Flatters, he's the one that voices Netiem. Jamie, Britain, Trinity, I thought they all did a great job playing their characters. Good chemistry with one another. Um, you definitely did buy that they were siblings, and they had their own certain screen presence, and they really brought these characters to life. And I thought that a lot of the performances by the kid actors in particular, I thought were definitely some of the most interesting and captivating performances in the film. Um, Jack Champion though is Spider. I mean, at the same time, I'm not really blaming Jack Champion that much because it's a difficult role to pull off because it's essentially Wild Boy with dreadlocks who's like growling and snarling like he's Navi, and it's a kind of role that I don't really think any actor will be able to pull that off and make it convincing, no matter how talented they were. So I'm not really blaming him that much. He did the best he could with what he had to work with, which is a pretty bad character, but it's definitely not what I would consider a standout performance. But yeah, I mean, there's a few other actors and actresses who play other members of Quatrich's military group, but there's really not much to say about them. They don't really have much depth. They don't really have much lines of dialogue. They don't really have much to say or do. So there's really not much to really criticize about the performance. I mean, one of the guys, he's literally become a meme. Another guy who's just sitting cross-armed with like sunglasses on. That's the majority of these performances by the other recombinant DNA soldiers in this film. But yeah, when it comes to the main cast, they did a good job for the most part. They really did. Now, when it comes to the rest of the film, good cinematography by Russell Carpenter, the editing by Stephen Rifkin, David Brenner, John Rafua, and James Cameron. Excellent, top notch, top flight. The music by Simon Frangelen is just copying James Horner's score from Avatar, and that's fine because that's what that works. That's the spirit of this film. It makes sense that a lot of the music, a lot of the themes here are just a lot of what James Horner brought to Avatar. But there was something interesting about the score. While the newer pieces didn't really evoke any kind of reaction from me, I was so indifferent about them. The way that this composer compiled the best of what Horner brought to Avatar, I really liked because it didn't have as much of the same repetitive notes, like the Willow stuff and all this other repetitive stuff that Horner he was known for, and for better or worse, it was like one of those things where it was a calling card, and it wasn't always necessarily the best calling card, but it was a calling card nonetheless. And I like the fact that Franklin found a nice balance and found what was working with that score and just focused on that and didn't really have and cut a lot of the stuff that didn't work in Avatar when it comes to the score by James Horner. So I thought that was a underrated job well done by Simon Frangelen for this score. And yes, it's too long. 192 minutes is way too long of a running time. Yeah, too long. Did not need to be 3 hours. Like I said, trim a good chunk of the first hour, trim out some of these subplots that don't really lead to a lot of anywhere and don't really contribute much except forced attempts at drama or other unnecessary stuff. In all honesty, you could have cut out the whole stuff with Spider and his dad. You don't even need that anyway. Why did he have to be the son of Quatrich? And why do we even need Spider? Why do we even need this character? Like, what is even the point of this character? To humanize Quatrich? Why? Why do all these villains have to be sympathetic in some way or another lately? Like, why can't you just be a son of a bitch? He's just a fucking asshole who has a power trip and wants to invade Home Tree. Like, why does it have to be overly complicated? You know, some people are just fucking assholes. So I think it's fine if was just an asshole, even when he's a Na'vi. You don't need to have Spider. You don't need to have this whole thing with him, and he's bonding with Quatrich, and then him saving Quatrich at the end. Completely unneeded and unnecessary, and doesn't add nearly as much depth to the story as the writers think it does. So that in itself, just cutting out Spider, cutting out all that stuff, that would have helped the movie in terms of its pacing. So, yeah, definitely not something to be 3 hours. I get it, Cameron. You want to make epic films, but that doesn't mean they need to be the running time of the Ten Commandments or longer than the running time of the Ten Commandments or something like Cleopatra from the 60s or was it the 50s? I forgot what year it was. I think it was the 60s. The one with Elizabeth. Was it Elizabeth Taylor? Um, but yeah, all of that being said, um, I liked it. Like I said, I liked this film. I actually would recommend it if it does interest you or intrigues you in any way, especially to see it in the theater, because it's a really impressive film to witness on the biggest screen possible and in 3D if you can. Definitely had some of the best 3D I've seen in a long time. And yeah, I can see why a lot of people went and saw it more than once to immerse themselves in this world again. Say whatever you want about James Cameron, the man is not only still a great filmmaker, but he is without a doubt a amazing guy when it comes to being a proponent of visual effects and pushing visual effects past boundaries that for the most part no other filmmaker has really done before or has really had the same passion to do. So, uh, I think it's actually quite wonderful that we get to see James Cameron pushing these boundaries and breaking these barriers when it comes to visual effects because a lot of people wouldn't go to this much of an effort. They wouldn't have the money, they wouldn't have the resources, and they wouldn't have the same passion. So, yeah, I got nothing else. This review is probably for a lot of people way too long, but still not as long as the movie. But anyway, thanks for watching my review of Avatar: The Way of Water. And as always, I'll see you later. See ya.